The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched so far that the ceiling disappeared into artificial clouds. Representatives from 200 species sat in curved rows, each in their own environmental bubbles. Some breathed methane, others lived in water tanks, and a few existed as pure energy contained in crystalline shells. They had gathered for a dispute that should have been simple, but nothing involving humans ever stayed simple for long. The Velkir ambassador stood at the speaking platform, his forearms gesturing dramatically. His species had ruled their sector for 3,000 years, and they did not appreciate newcomers challenging their authority. The holographic display showed a star system with 7 planets, 3 of them rich in rare metals that powered faster than light engines. The Talon system belongs to the Velkir Dominion by right of ancient claim, the ambassador announced, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic. These humans arrived in our space barely 50 cycles ago. They have no legitimate claim to our resources. Ambassador HFY stood in the human section, her face calm despite the insult. She had been Earth's voice in the council for 3 years, and she had learned that showing anger only made things worse. Humans were still the new species, the ones everyone watched with suspicion. They were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to break old rules. The Talon system was abandoned, HFY said clearly. Your people left it 400 years ago. Under council law, any unclaimed system may be settled by those who develop it. Humanity has built 3 colonies there. We have 15,000 people living on those worlds. The Velkir ambassador's skin flushed dark purple, a sign of rage in his species. Then we invoke the ancient right. We call for the trial of the void. A collective murmur ran through the hall. Several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the water-dwelling species made a sound like grinding ice. The trial had not been invoked in over 200 cycles. The head arbiter, an ancient being named Kelvus, whose species had been traveling space when Earth's ancestors still lived in trees, leaned forward in his floating chair. His voice echoed with natural authority that needed no translation. The Velkir invoke their right under the oldest laws. Does humanity accept the trial, or do they withdraw their claim? HFY felt her stomach tighten. She had read about the trial in the historical records. It was ancient, brutal, and absolute. One champion from each side would enter the labyrinth, a pocket dimension that existed in folded space. The labyrinth killed everyone who entered. Always. In 10,000 years, not one being had ever returned from it. We request time to consult with our government, HFY said. You have 1 solar day, Kelvus replied. The Velkir champion is already prepared. The council session ended and HFY rushed back to the human embassy. The communication with Earth took hours due to the distance, but the response from the colonial office was clear. Find a way out of this. Humanity could not afford to look weak, but they also could not waste a life on an impossible challenge. HFY spent the night reviewing every record of the trial. The last time it had been used was 237 years ago. A species called the Morthans had challenged the council's tax system. Their champion had lasted 6 hours in the labyrinth before his signal went dead. Before that, a warrior from the Kelvin Prides had survived for 3 days. The record was held by a Torval hunter who had managed 11 days before the labyrinth claimed her. No one ever came back. The biosignals always flatlined eventually. The portal never opened from the inside. She was studying the dimensional readings from the labyrinth entrance when her assistant knocked on her door. Ambassador, there's someone here to see you. He says he's volunteering for the trial. HFY looked up in surprise. Who would be insane enough to volunteer for suicide? The man who entered her office was not what she expected. He was in his early 40s, average height, with the weathered face of someone who spent time outdoors. He wore civilian clothes and carried a worn backpack. His name tag identified him as Daewon Kim, Colonial Survey Corps. You cannot be serious, HFY said. Do you understand what the trial is? Daewon sat down without being invited, which somehow did not seem rude when he did it. I've read every file we have on it. I know no one survives, but I also know that if we back down, every species in the galaxy will see us as afraid. They'll push us around forever. Better to be pushed around than dead. Is it? Daewon asked quietly. Ambassador, I've spent 20 years mapping places people said were impossible to map. The deep caves under Titan that twist in non-Euclidean patterns. The quantum forests on New Sol where space doesn't work right. The dimensional rifts in the Kepler colonies. Everyone said those places couldn't be charted. They were wrong. HFY studied him carefully. This is not about pride or proving something. The labyrinth has killed champions from species that have been traveling space for millennia. Warriors with armor that can withstand nuclear blasts. Scientists with technology were still trying to understand. What makes you think a human cartographer can do what they couldn't? Daewon pulled out his tablet and showed her a three-dimensional model. Because I don't think the labyrinth is meant to be fought. Look at the dimensional readings from the portal. See these patterns? They repeat. Everything repeats if you look at the right scale. The labyrinth isn't random. It's structured. It's a maze, and mazes can be mapped. Others must have thought of that. Maybe they did, but maybe they gave up too soon. Maybe they spent their time fighting instead of observing. Maybe they brought weapons when they should have brought survey equipment. He met her eyes steadily. I'm not a soldier, Ambassador. I'm not going to try to conquer the labyrinth. I'm just going to try to understand it. HFY wanted to say no. She wanted to forbid him from throwing his life away, but she had no authority to stop a citizen from volunteering, and the desperate part of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, this strange, quiet man had seen something everyone else had missed. I need to inform Earth, she said finally. Earth will say no. They'll want to negotiate or back down or find some diplomatic solution, but there isn't one. The Valkyr know we're afraid. They invoke the trial because they think we'll run. Daewon stood up. Let me do this. If I die, at least I die trying something no one has tried before. And if I somehow succeed, humanity gets to keep those colonies and earns respect we desperately need. The next day, HFY stood in the council hall and announced that humanity accepted the trial. Daewon would be their champion. The Valkyr ambassador laughed. You sent a mapmaker? Not even a soldier? He gestured to his own champion, a massive warrior named Thexal who stood 3 meters tall and wore armor that hummed with power. Your champion will not last an hour. Daewon stepped forward with his simple backpack and civilian clothes. He looked small next to the Valkyr warrior. He looked insignificant compared to the massive portal that shimmered in the center of the hall, its surface like oil on water, reflecting colors that should not exist. Kelvis activated the portal. The trial begins. May fortune favor the worthy. Thexal strode toward the portal confidently, his armor systems engaging with audible clicks. He stepped through and vanished. The monitoring systems showed his biosignal entering the labyrinth, strong and steady. Daewon walked to the portal more slowly. He paused at the threshold and looked back at HFY. He did not smile or offer false confidence. He simply nodded once, then stepped through. The portal swallowed him completely. The monitoring systems picked up his signal, a small green dot on the display, moving into the impossible space beyond. HFY watched the screen, her hands clenched tight. The Valkyr champion's signal was already deep in the labyrinth, moving fast and aggressive. Daewon's signal barely moved at all. He seemed to be standing still just beyond the entrance. Your champion has frozen in fear, the Valkyr ambassador said smugly. But HFY noticed something. Every few minutes, Daewon's signal would shift just slightly, in a precise grid pattern. He was not frozen. He was surveying. He was taking measurements. He was mapping. The council chamber slowly emptied as representatives returned to their duties. The trial would take days or weeks before both champions died. There was no reason to watch. HFY stayed. She watched that small green dot move with painful slowness through space that should not exist, and she hoped that Daewon's strange confidence was not misplaced, that his belief in patterns and understanding would somehow be enough where strength and technology had always failed. The labyrinth waited, patient and eternal as it had waited for 10,000 years. It had never returned anyone, but it had never faced someone who wanted to understand it before. The first thing Daewon noticed was that direction stopped making sense. He had stepped through the portal facing forward, but when he looked back, there was no portal behind him. Instead, there was a wall that seemed to be made of crystallized space itself, shimmering with colors that hurt to look at directly. When he turned around again, the corridor had changed. The path he thought he saw before was gone, replaced by 3 different passages branching in directions that somehow felt wrong. He took a deep breath and pulled out his tablet. His hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. This was excitement. The labyrinth was even stranger than the readings had suggested. He started with the basics. He marked his entry point as 000 and began taking measurements. Distance, angles, gravitational pull, radiation levels, temporal flow. The tablet's sensors worked, though some of them showed readings that should have been impossible. Gravity pointed in 3 directions at once. Time moved at different speeds depending on which way he faced. The air was breathable but came from nowhere he could detect. After an hour of careful measurement, Daewon took his first step deeper into the labyrinth. He walked exactly 10 meters, then stopped and took more readings. Then another 10 meters, then more readings. It was slow and methodical work, the kind that would bore most people to tears. But this was what Daewon did. This was what he loved. On his 3rd hour, he found the first body. It was old, maybe centuries old, preserved by the strange environment of the labyrinth. The being had been some kind of reptilian species, wearing armor that had fused to its bones. Its weapon lay nearby, still gripped in skeletal fingers. Daewon marked the location carefully and moved on. There was nothing he could do for the dead, but he could learn from where they fell. The Valkyr champion's signal had already moved far ahead, deeper into the labyrinth. Daewon could track it on his display. Thexal was moving fast, fighting his way through, probably following warrior instincts honed over a lifetime of combat. Daewon suspected those instincts would get the Valkyr killed. The labyrinth did not respond well to aggression. By the end of the first day, or what Daewon estimated was a day since time was strange here, he had mapped 200 meters of corridor and documented 17 different types of spatial anomalies. He had also found a place where 2 walls met at an angle that created a stable pocket of space. The gravitational fluctuations did not reach there. It seemed safe enough to rest. He ate a protein bar and drank water from his canteen, rationing carefully. He had supplies for 30 days if he was careful, 40 if he starved himself. He hoped he would not need 40 days, but he had learned long ago that hope was not a survival strategy. Planning was. The second day brought new challenges. The corridors started changing while he watched. A passage would be there one moment and gone the next, replaced by a wall or another passage heading in a completely different direction. At first, Daewon thought it was random, but after 6 hours of observation, he caught the pattern. The changes happened in cycles like a tide coming in and out. The labyrinth breathed. He adjusted his mapping technique. Instead of marking fixed positions, he started mapping probability zones. This corridor existed 80% of the time. That passage only appeared every 3 hours. This room was always there, but its exits changed. It was complex work, requiring constant attention and recalculation, but slowly a picture emerged. The labyrinth had rules. Strange rules. Rules that broke normal physics, but rules nonetheless. On the 4th day, Daewon encountered one of the predators. He heard it before he saw it. A clicking sound that echoed through the corridors in a way that sound should not travel. Then it appeared around a corner, moving with liquid grace. It was biomechanical, part living creature and part machine, about the size of a large dog but built like a mantis. Its cutting arms gleamed with edges that looked sharp enough to split atoms. Daewon froze. The predator's head swiveled toward him, sensors glowing red. It moved closer, those cutting arms raising. Daewon noticed it was following the left wall, moving in a standard patrol pattern. He pressed himself against the right wall and held perfectly still. The predator passed within 2 meters of him. Its sensors swept over him, paused, then moved on. It continued down the corridor, following its patrol route, and disappeared around another corner. Daewon waited 5 full minutes before he moved. His heart was racing, but his hands were steady as he made notes. The predators were not programmed to hunt. They were programmed to patrol. As long as he did not move suddenly or get in their path, they might ignore him. It was valuable information that had probably never been documented before, because previous champions had likely tried to fight the creatures instead of observing them. Over the next week, Daewon mapped patrol routes of 7 different predators. He learned their cycles, their patterns, their blind spots. He started timing his movements to avoid them entirely. It added hours to his journey, sometimes doubling back or waiting in safe pockets, but it kept him alive. The Valkyr champion's signal went dark on day 9. Daewon saw it happen on his display. Thexal's biosign flickered, surged as if the warrior was fighting something, then flatlined. Another champion lost to the labyrinth. Daewon marked the location and continued his work. On day 12, he made a breakthrough. He found a chamber where 6 corridors met in a pattern that reminded him of the dimensional rifts he had mapped on the Kepler colonies. The geometry was similar. The spatial distortions followed the same mathematical curves. This was not random alien architecture. This was engineered space, built according to principles that were complex but consistent. He spent 2 full days in that chamber, taking measurements from every angle, mapping every surface, documenting every anomaly. When he finally understood the pattern, he sat down and laughed until tears ran down his face. The labyrinth was a fractal, the same patterns repeated at different scales. Every corridor was a smaller version of larger structures, and those structures were smaller versions of even larger ones. If he could map one section completely, he could predict the others. Water became a problem around day 15. His canteen was nearly empty, and he had found no source to refill it. But he had noticed something during his mapping. In certain areas where dimensional boundaries overlapped, condensation formed on the walls. It was not much, just a few drops, but it was water pulled from somewhere else in spacetime. He collected it carefully with a piece of cloth, squeezing drops into his canteen. It was slow work and the water tasted strange, but it kept him alive. Food ran out on day 18. Day 1's stomach cramped with hunger, but he kept working. His mind felt sharp, maybe sharper than usual, stripped down to pure focus, map, measure, mark, move. The routine became meditation. He found more bodies. A Torval hunter in full combat gear, a Morthian diplomat still clutching a data pad, a being he could not identify, so old its species might be extinct. Each one had died fighting or fleeing. None had stopped to understand. On day 23, half-starved and exhausted, Day 1 discovered something extraordinary. He was following a corridor that seemed to lead nowhere, a dead end that his measurements said should not be a dead end. The fractal patterns suggested there should be something more. He examined the wall carefully and found seams nearly invisible in the crystallized space. It was a door, or something like a door. He pressed his hand against it and the wall responded, reading something in his biosignature or his intentions, or perhaps just the fact that he was asking politely instead of demanding. The wall dissolved. Beyond it was a chamber larger than anything he had seen in the labyrinth. The ceiling soared 30 meters high, and the walls were covered in displays that flickered with data in languages he did not recognize. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and floating above it was a sphere of pure light containing more information than he could process. This was the core, the heart of the labyrinth, the place every champion had been trying to reach, but none had survived long enough to find. Day 1 walked forward slowly, his tablet held out, recording everything. The displays on the walls reacted to his presence, information flowing in patterns that reminded him of the fractal structure of the labyrinth itself. He realized this was not just a test or a trap. This was a library. The civilization that built the labyrinth had left their knowledge here, preserved in folded space, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. He reached out and touched the sphere of light. Information flooded into his tablet, terabytes of data downloading in seconds. Schematics, histories, technologies, mathematics, art, philosophy, everything the progenitors had been, preserved for anyone who could survive their test. When the download finished, Daiwan stood in the silent chamber and finally let himself feel the weight of what he had accomplished. He was starving, dehydrated, exhausted to his bones, but he had done it. He had mapped the labyrinth. He had found the core, and now he had to figure out how to get home. He pulled up his complete map, all the data he had gathered over 23 days of careful observation. The patterns were clear now. The labyrinth was a puzzle that wanted to be solved. The way out was not the way in, but his fractal model showed him where it should be. Day 1 began the long walk back, following a path no one had ever walked before, a route that existed in probability spaces between the walls of the labyrinth. His tablet showed the way, and he trusted the mathematics that had kept him alive this long. 3 days later, weak and barely conscious, Day 1 pressed his hand against a wall that his calculations said was thin. The wall dissolved. Bright light flooded in. He stumbled forward and fell through the portal, collapsing on the floor of the council chamber. Alarms blared. Voices shouted in a dozen languages. Hands grabbed him, pulling him away from the portal. Through blurred vision, Day 1 saw Ambassador Hiram's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I mapped it," he whispered. "All of it." Then he passed out, his tablet clutched tight against his chest, containing secrets that would change the galaxy forever. The medical bay of the human embassy was designed for standard injuries and illnesses. not for someone who had spent nearly a month in a dimension that broke the laws of physics. Day One's body was shutting down from starvation and dehydration. His cells showed damage from temporal exposure, as if parts of him had aged while other parts had not. The doctors worked for 18 hours straight, pumping him with nutrients and cellular repair nanobots, trying to undo what the labyrinth had done. Ambassador HFY sat beside his bed the entire time, refusing to leave even when her staff begged her to rest. She held his tablet like it was made of glass and gold. She had seen the file sizes. 6 terabytes of data, from a place that should have killed him. When Day One finally woke, his first words were not about his health. Did the data survive? Is it intact? HFY laughed, a sound caught between joy and exhaustion. Yes, all of it. You incredible fool. You actually did it. I need to present it to the council. The Velker will claim I did not reach the core. They will say I hid somewhere and faked the data. Day One tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His body felt like it belonged to someone else. You need to heal first. The doctors say you should not even be conscious yet. How long was I gone? Outside time, I mean. 47 days. The Velker champion lasted 9 days. After that, they started preparing to claim the Talon system. Then your biosignal reappeared and you came through the portal and everything changed. HFY's expression turned serious. Day One, you need to understand what is about to happen. The moment the council sees what you brought back, every species in the galaxy will want it. Some will offer alliances. Others will threaten war. We need to be ready. Then we should not wait. Call the council. I can present the data now. You can barely stand. I walked through a place that killed everyone who entered it for 10,000 years. I think I can manage a council presentation. 3 days later, Day One stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. He still looked thin and tired, but he was upright and his mind was clear. The council chamber was more crowded than HFY had ever seen it. Word had spread that the human champion had returned, and every species wanted to witness what he had brought back. The Velker ambassador was already on his feet, his 4 arms waving in agitation. This is a trick. Humans are known for their deceptions. No one survives the trial. He must have hidden near the entrance and fabricated data. Kelvis, the head arbiter, raised one ancient hand for silence. His eyes, which had seen millennia pass, studied Day One with something that might have been respect. The human will present his evidence. Then we will judge. Day One connected his tablet to the council's holographic system. The air above the chamber floor shimmered and then exploded into light and data. A 3-dimensional model of the labyrinth unfolded, growing larger and more complex by the second. Corridors twisted through impossible angles. Chambers connected in ways that violated Euclidean geometry. Temporal loops cycled in patterns that made several species translators emit error sounds. But it was not chaos. The more the model expanded, the clearer the patterns became. Fractals within fractals. Mathematical elegance hidden inside apparent madness. Day One had color-coded different types of spaces. Stable zones in blue, temporal anomalies in red, gravitational wells in yellow, predator patrol routes in purple. The entire labyrinth was mapped in stunning detail. This is the labyrinth, Day One said, his voice steady. Every corridor, every chamber, every dangerous zone. I spent 26 days mapping it, 3 days reaching the core and 3 days finding the way out. He zoomed the display to a massive chamber at the center of the structure. This is where the progenitors left their legacy. He played the recording. The council watched in silence as the video showed Day One entering the core chamber, approaching the sphere of light, downloading the data. The timestamp was clear. The location readings matched the deepest part of the labyrinth that had never been reached before. The Velker ambassador's skin had turned pale gray. This is not possible. You must have used human technology to fake the coordinates. The data can be verified, Day One replied calmly. The progenitor files contain information about the labyrinth's construction. Mathematical proofs that can be tested. Technologies that can be built and demonstrated. Truth does not need to be believed. It simply is. Kelva stood, his ancient body moving with surprising grace. He descended from his high seat and approached the holographic display. His long fingers moved through the air, manipulating the data, examining it from every angle. The entire council watched in silence. When the head arbiter finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The data is legitimate. The mapping is accurate. The human has proven that the labyrinth can be understood and navigated. He turned to face Daewon directly. You have accomplished what no being has done in 10,000 years. By the ancient laws, humanity's claim to the Talon system is upheld. The Velkir challenge has failed. The Velkir delegation exploded in protests, but Kelva silenced them with a gesture. The law is clear. Your champion fell. The human champion succeeded. The matter is settled. But Hiram could see that this was just the beginning. Representatives from a dozen species were already moving, sending urgent communications, gathering in whispered conversations. The data Daewon had brought back was far more valuable than one star system. The progenitors had been the first spacefaring civilization, the ones who had built the foundations of galactic society before mysteriously vanishing millions of years ago. Their technology was legendary. Their knowledge was priceless, and humanity now possessed it. A representative from the Karathi Unity approached, her crystalline body chiming with harmonics that her translator rendered as speech. Ambassador Hiram, the Unity would like to discuss a technology sharing agreement. We can offer significant resources in exchange for access to the progenitor data. Before Hiram could respond, a diplomat from the Nexian Combine stepped forward. The Combine has stronger currency reserves. We should discuss terms first. Within minutes, Hiram was surrounded by representatives from 17 different species, all making offers, all demanding consideration. The crowd pressed closer, voices rising in competition. Daewon found himself pushed to the edge of the group, watching with bemused detachment as galactic politics erupted around his discovery. Then the Velkir ambassador pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. This data should belong to the Council, not to one species. It is too dangerous for humans to control alone. Dangerous for whom? Hiram shot back. Dangerous for you because we beat your challenge and proved humanity deserves respect? Humanity is young and reckless. You do not understand the responsibility of holding such power. You will destabilize the entire galactic order. The galactic order that said no one could survive the trial? The order that would have taken our colonies and called us cowards when we refused to die. Hiram's voice cut through the noise. We followed your laws. We accepted your challenge. We won. And now you want to change the rules because you do not like the outcome. The crowd fell silent. It was rare for anyone to speak so bluntly in the council chamber, especially someone from a species as new as humanity. But Hiram had spent 3 years learning to navigate galactic politics, and she knew that showing weakness now would invite disaster. Kelvas watched the confrontation with ancient eyes. The human speaks truth. The data was obtained through legitimate means. It belongs to humanity by right of achievement. He turned to address the full council. However, the implications of this discovery extend beyond one species. We must consider how this knowledge will affect galactic stability. Then let us consider it together, Daewon said, speaking for the first time since proving his claim. The crowd turned to look at him. The labyrinth still exists. The portal remains open. What if others could learn to navigate it as I did? The chamber erupted in noise again, species shouting over each other in a dozen languages. The idea was radical. The labyrinth had been considered a death sentence for millennia. Suggesting that others could survive it challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic society. You would teach others your methods? Asked a representative from the Althan Collective, her fur rippling with electrical patterns of surprise. Why not? I did not survive because humans are superior. I survived because I approached the problem differently. I mapped instead of fought. I observed instead of conquered. Daewon looked around the chamber, meeting eyes and sensors and consciousness fields. The labyrinth is not a death trap. It is a test of patience and understanding. Anyone willing to learn can pass it. You would give away your advantage? The Velkir ambassador sounded genuinely confused. You would help species who might use that knowledge against you? Knowledge shared is not knowledge lost, Daewon replied. The progenitors built the labyrinth as a library, not a vault. They wanted their legacy to be found. They were disappointed that no one tried to understand it. I saw their message in the core chamber. They hoped future civilizations would be wiser than they were, would seek understanding before power. Hiram felt a chill run down her spine. This was not what they had discussed. This was Daewon going completely off script, making policy decisions that should involve Earth's government, the colonial office, and months of careful negotiation. But she also recognized the brilliance of it. If humanity hoarded the progenitor technology, they would become targets. But if they offered to share knowledge through the labyrinth itself, they became teachers instead of tyrants. This proposal requires careful consideration, Kelva said, his voice thoughtful. We will reconvene in 3 days to discuss the establishment of what the human suggests. Until then, this session is adjourned. As the council chamber emptied, HFY pulled Daewon aside. That was incredibly risky. You just offered to give away the biggest advantage humanity has ever had. No, Daewon said quietly, watching the various species file out, already arguing among themselves about what this meant. I offered to teach them how to earn their own advantages. There is a difference. The labyrinth has different treasures in different sections. What we found may not be what they find, and some of them will fail because they will not have the patience to truly learn. And if they succeed, if we train our rivals to access progenitor technology, Daewon smiled, tired but genuine. Then maybe we will finally have neighbors who understand that survival is not about being the strongest. It is about being willing to learn. The attack started on the 3rd day after Daewon's return. Not physical attacks at first, but something more subtle and more dangerous. Information warfare, diplomatic pressure, economic threats. 7 species formally petitioned the Council to declare the progenitor data as shared galactic heritage. 3 civilizations threatened to impose trade sanctions on human colonies if the technology was not released. Pirates funded by unknown sponsors began raiding human shipping routes, hoping to capture vessels that might contain copies of the data. In a private meeting room deep in the human embassy, Director Tae-Yang of Colonial Intelligence spread holographic reports across the table. He was a man who had spent 30 years protecting human interests through espionage, negotiation, and when necessary, violence. He looked at Daewon with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing shape. We have confirmed 3 assassination attempts being planned against you, Tae-Yang said bluntly. The Valkyr are funding one through intermediaries. The other 2 we have not traced yet, but the contracts are substantial. You are currently the most valuable target in known space. Daewon sat quietly, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. He looked thinner than before the labyrinth, and his eyes carried a distance that had not been there before. They want the data. They want you dead so the knowledge dies with you, Tae-Yang corrected. Or they want you captured and forced to reveal everything you know about navigating the labyrinth. Either way, you cannot stay here. We have prepared a secure facility on Earth, completely hidden with identity changes and full protection. You can live there comfortably for the rest of your life. In hiding. In safety. No. Daewon set down his teacup with a soft click. I did not survive the labyrinth to spend the rest of my life in a cage. Ambassador HFY, who had been standing by the window, turned around. Daewon, please be reasonable. We are talking about organized assassination attempts. These are not amateurs. The Valkyr have intelligence services that have been operating for 3,000 years. Then assign me security, bodyguards, whatever you need. But I will not hide. He met their eyes steadily. If I disappear, it confirms every species' belief that humans are afraid. It tells them we do not truly believe in what I propose to the Council. How can I offer to teach others to navigate the labyrinth if I am hiding on Earth? Tae-Yang pinched the bridge of his nose. You are making my job significantly harder. Your job is to protect human interests. My proposal protects human interests better than any amount of secrecy. If we hoard knowledge, we make enemies. If we share methods but not data, we make allies. Daewon pulled up files on his tablet. I have been studying the progenitor files. The technologies they left are incredible, but they are also specialized. Different sections of the labyrinth contain different types of information. What we found is valuable to us, but it may not be what the Valkyr need or what the Karathi want. If we teach others to map and navigate, they can find their own treasures. And if they find weapons, technologies that could threaten us, then we will already know they have them because we will have taught them how to navigate. We will understand their capabilities because we understand the labyrinth. Daewon leaned forward. Director, the biggest threat is not other species having technology. The biggest threat is them believing we are trying to dominate them through superior knowledge. That fear will unite them against us. But if we position ourselves as teachers, as guides, we become valuable instead of threatening. HFY moved to the table and sat down. The Council reconvenes tomorrow to discuss your proposal. Earth's government has sent directives. They want guarantees, restrictions, controls on who can access the training. They want the Pathfinder Initiative, as you called it, to be entirely under human authority. That defeats the purpose, Day One said immediately. If it is human-controlled, other species will see it as a tool of human power. It needs to be independent, or at least appear independent. Maybe under council oversight with human administration. Tae-young made a sound of frustration. You realize you are proposing to give up control of the most valuable discovery in galactic history, and simultaneously making yourself a permanent target? I am proposing we change the game entirely. The old rules say the strong dominate the weak. The labyrinth has shown me that the progenitors tried that approach and it destroyed them. Their final message in the core chamber was a warning. They achieved incredible power, conquered hundreds of worlds, and ultimately fell because no one understood them. They became so powerful that everyone either feared them or worshipped them, but no one truly knew them. That isolation destroyed them from within. Silence filled the room. The weight of Daewon's words hung in the air like a physical thing. He had not shared that detail before, the actual message from the progenitors. What exactly did the message say? Hiram asked softly. Daewon pulled it up on the holographic display. Ancient symbols flowed across the air, accompanied by his translation. We reached for the stars and grasped only emptiness. We sought power and found loneliness. We built wonders and had no one to share them with. Let those who follow us learn what we could not. Understanding is greater than dominance. Connection is stronger than control. Do not repeat our mistakes. The three of them stared at the alien script, each processing the implications in their own way. The progenitors, the mighty civilization that had built the foundations of galactic society, had died not from war or disaster but from isolation born of superiority. That is what I am trying to prevent, Daewon said. If humanity becomes the new progenitors, powerful but alone, we will follow the same path. But if we become teachers, if we share understanding instead of hoarding power, we can be something different, something better. Tae-young stood abruptly and paced to the window. For a long moment he said nothing, looking out at the alien cityscape beyond the embassy. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision. I will recommend to Earth that they approve your approach, but you will have security. Non-negotiable, a full protection detail, the best we have. Agreed. And you will submit to regular debriefings. Everything you learn, every insight you gain gets reported. We need to know what knowledge is being distributed. Also agreed, as long as the information is used to help the program succeed, not to undermine it. Hiram nodded slowly. Then tomorrow we present this to the council. But Day One, you need to understand the reality. We are going to make powerful enemies. The species that wanted to seize the data for themselves will not forgive us for giving others access to it. And the ones we train will not necessarily become our friends. Some of them will take what they learn and use it against us. I know, Day One said simply, but at least they will understand us. And we will understand them. That is worth the risk. The next day, the council chamber was even more crowded than before. Representatives from every major species had come, along with observers from 100 minor civilizations. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Humanity's decision would reshape galactic politics for generations. President Jae-hee of Earth appeared on the holographic display, addressing the council directly from the human homeworld. She was a woman who had led Earth through first contact with alien civilizations, through trade negotiations and territorial disputes, through the growing pains of becoming a galactic species. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her position through decades of difficult decisions. Humanity has considered the implications of the progenitor discovery carefully, she said. We recognize the concern among many species that this knowledge could destabilize galactic society. We also recognize the opportunity it represents for mutual growth and understanding. The chamber held its collective breath. Therefore, humanity proposes the establishment of the Pathfinder Initiative, an independent organization devoted to teaching navigation of the labyrinth. Any species that wishes to participate may send candidates. The training will be rigorous and many will not succeed, but those who complete it will have earned their own discoveries in the labyrinth. They will not receive our data. They will find their own. Reactions exploded across the chamber. Some species cheered, seeing opportunity. Others protested, calling it a trap or a trick. The Velker delegation remained ominously silent, their faces unreadable. Kelvis raised his hand for quiet. This is a bold proposal. It requires discussion and safeguards, but it has merit. The Council will form a committee to establish guidelines for this initiative. Humanity will provide the initial training personnel and methods. The program will operate under Council oversight to ensure fairness and safety. A representative from the Karathi Unity rose, her crystalline body chiming. What guarantee do we have that humans will truly teach their methods? How do we know this is not a deception? Day one stood. I will personally train the first class. Every technique I used, every insight I gained will be taught freely. If I can survive the labyrinth, others can too, but they must be willing to learn patience, to embrace observation over aggression, to understand before they act. Those who cannot or will not learn these things will fail. The labyrinth itself will be the judge. And what of the data you already possess? Asked a Nexian diplomat. The progenitor technologies you have downloaded. That remains human property earned through the trial, President Jahi said firmly. But we will share selected non-military technologies through standard trade agreements. We will not hoard everything. We will simply keep what we earned through our champion's sacrifice. It was a careful balance, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Humanity was offering access to the labyrinth while keeping the fruits of their first journey. They were opening a door while maintaining an advantage. It was exactly the kind of practical compromise that could work, or that could explode into conflict. The Velkir ambassador finally stood, his forearms spread wide. This proposal is acceptable to the Velkir Dominion, with one condition. When our candidates succeed in the labyrinth, humanity will acknowledge our equal achievement publicly. No more claims of human superiority. Agreed, Day One said immediately. The labyrinth does not care about species. It only cares about understanding. That simple statement seemed to shift something in the chamber. The conversation moved from confrontation to negotiation, from threats to terms. Over the next 6 hours, the framework for the Pathfinder Initiative took shape, hammered out through argument and compromise. When the session finally ended, Hyreem found Day One sitting alone in an observation deck, looking at the stars beyond the station. She sat beside him without speaking for a long moment. You changed the galaxy today, she said finally. I just gave them a map, Day One replied quietly. What they do with it is their choice. Do you really believe they will become better through this? That understanding will lead to peace? Day One considered the question carefully. No. Some of them will use what they learn to harm others. Some will fail and blame us. Some will succeed and forget we helped them. But some, maybe just a few, will understand what the progenitors tried to tell us, and that small number might be enough to change things. They sat together in silence, watching the vast sweep of stars, knowing that the work ahead would be difficult and dangerous, knowing that the map Day One brought back had started something that could not be stopped. 6 months after Day One returned from the labyrinth, the Pathfinder Academy hung in space near the portal like a promise and a challenge. The station had been built quickly through a rare moment of council cooperation, with materials donated by 17 species and construction crews working in shifts around the clock. It was not beautiful, but it was functional, and that suited Day One perfectly. The first cohort of students gathered in the main training hall. 23 beings from 17 species, each one carefully selected by their governments as the best chance for success. Warriors, scientists, explorers, and scholars. They eyed each other with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Natural rivals forced into cooperation by the promise of knowledge. Day One stood at the front of the room, looking remarkably ordinary next to his exotic students. A Velkir warrior stood nearly twice his height, a Karathi crystalline being pulsed with inner light. A Nexian diplomat's tentacles moved with fluid grace. A Torval hunter's augmented eyes tracked every movement. And among them, representing the human colonies, was a young woman named Hana, who had grown up exploring cave systems on Earth. Welcome to the Pathfinder Academy, Day One said, his voice calm and clear. You are here because your governments believe you can succeed where thousands before you have failed. You are here because you are the strongest, the smartest, the bravest of your species. He let that sit for a moment, watching their faces swell with pride, and none of that matters in the labyrinth. The mood shifted immediately. Several students bristled. The Velkir warrior's skin flushed dark with anger. Day One had expected this reaction. Strength does not help when gravity points in 3 directions at once. Intelligence does not matter when mathematics stops working normally. Bravery is useless when the corridors change while you watch. He pulled up a holographic image of the labyrinth. The beings who died in there were strong, intelligent, and brave. They failed because they approached the labyrinth as a problem to solve through force or cleverness. It is neither. It is a place to be understood. A Nexian student raised a tentacle. You survive through understanding. But you are human. Perhaps the labyrinth responds differently to different species. Perhaps, Day One acknowledged. That is something you will discover. But the methods I used are universal. Observation, measurement, pattern recognition, patience. These work regardless of what species you are. How long did it take you to map your route? Asked the Torval hunter. 26 days to reach the core. But I was learning as I went. You will have the advantage of training. With proper preparation, you should reach significant areas within 2 weeks. Should? The Valkyr warrior stepped forward. That is not exactly confidence-inspiring. I am not here to inspire confidence. I am here to teach you how to survive. Confidence without foundation is just arrogance, and the labyrinth kills arrogant people very efficiently. Daiwan met the warrior's eyes without flinching. If you cannot accept that everything you know about combat and survival may be wrong in there, you should leave now. The labyrinth does not care about your pride. For a tense moment, the Valkyr warrior stared at the small human who dared speak to him that way. Then slowly, the warrior's posture relaxed. Teach me then. I will listen. The training was brutal. Not physically, but mentally. Daewon forced them to sit still for hours, observing minor changes in test environments. He made them map empty rooms with obsessive precision, measuring angles to fractions of degrees. He taught them to move slowly, deliberately, abandoning every instinct that said speed was survival. Half the class dropped out in the first month. They could not handle the tedium, the endless repetition, the complete absence of glory. Those who remained began to change. The Valkyr warrior learned patience. The Nexian diplomat learned to trust measurements over intuition. Hana, who had spent years exploring Earth's caves, adapted fastest of all, her experience with three-dimensional navigation translating well to the labyrinth's impossible geometry. 3 months into training, Day One took them to the portal for the first time. Not to enter, just to observe. They stood in the council chamber, now converted to a training facility, and watched the swirling surface of the gateway. The labyrinth is not evil, Daewon said quietly. It is not trying to kill you. It is simply operating according to rules we do not fully understand yet. Think of it as an ocean. The ocean is not your enemy. But if you do not respect it, if you do not learn its patterns and currents, it will kill you without malice or mercy. He turned to face his students. Some of you will fail. Some of you may die despite everything I teach you. I need you to understand that before we continue. This is not safe. This is not guaranteed. All I can do is give you the best chance possible. None of them left. They had come too far to turn back now. The real training intensified. Daewon taught them about temporal distortions, how to recognize when time was moving differently. He showed them gravitational mapping techniques, ways to sense spatial warping before walking into it. He drilled them on the predator patrol patterns he had documented, teaching them to move between the hunting routes. Most importantly, he taught them to think in fractals, to see how patterns repeated at different scales throughout the labyrinth. On the 5th month, Hana went first. She stood at the portal with her mapping equipment and her carefully packed supplies. She looked at Daewon with a nervous smile. Any last advice? Remember that the fastest way through is the slowest path. Map everything, trust your measurements, and if you find something unexpected, do not panic. Unexpected is normal in there. Hana nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped through the portal. Her biosignal appeared on the monitors, a green dot moving into impossible space. Unlike previous champions, she did not charge forward. She moved in a careful grid pattern, exactly as she had been taught, mapping the entrance area with systematic precision. For 2 weeks, the Academy monitored her progress. She encountered predators and avoided them. She found temporal loops and navigated around them. She mapped her route with obsessive detail, following the fractal patterns Daewon had identified. On day 16, her signal reached a chamber that no one had documented before. She spent 3 days mapping it completely, then downloaded the information she found there. On day 21, Hana stepped back through the portal. She was thinner and exhausted, but alive, and she carried data about biological systems that the progenitors had studied. Information that would advance human medical technology by decades. She had succeeded. The galaxy took notice. If one human could survive and now a second, perhaps the labyrinth really could be navigated. Perhaps Day-One's methods actually worked. 3 weeks later, the Velkyr warrior Thalmor made his attempt. He had been the most resistant to training, the one who struggled most with patience, but he had learned slowly and painfully. He entered the labyrinth following his carefully prepared route plan. For 8 days he moved through the corridors with disciplined precision. Then his signal vanished. The Academy held its breath. They monitored the location where he disappeared, hoping for the biosign to reappear. Nothing. Days passed. A week. The Velkyr delegation prepared to claim he had been betrayed, that human methods were flawed, that this proved the labyrinth was still certain death. Then, on day 17, Thalmor's signal reappeared deeper in the labyrinth than where he had vanished. He continued moving, following his route. On day 24, he emerged from the portal carrying military tactical data from the progenitor era. He had not died. He had found a section of the labyrinth where normal sensors did not work, a dead zone where biosignals disappeared. He had continued forward on faith in his training and his measurements, and he had been right. The Velkyr delegation erupted in celebration. Their warrior had proven equal to the human achievement. The council formally acknowledged that the labyrinth could be navigated by any species with proper training and dedication. Over the next 6 months, 7 more students successfully completed their journeys. 3 failed and turned back before reaching critical danger. 2 were lost, their signals vanishing permanently, bodies never recovered. The Academy held memorial services for them. They had known the risks. They had chosen to try anyway. As more beings succeeded, the political landscape shifted in ways no one had fully predicted. Species that had been rivals for centuries found common ground in their shared experience of the labyrinth. Warriors who had trained together formed bonds that transcended old hatreds. The simple act of learning together, struggling together, surviving together, created connections that treaties and agreements never could. Not everyone was happy about this. Conservative factions and multiple governments saw the mixing of species as dangerous. Extremist groups, calling themselves the Purists, began organizing protests and then attacks. They believed ancient knowledge should remain buried, that the labyrinth was sacred ground being desecrated by the Pathfinder Initiative. The first attack came on a quiet Tuesday morning. A bomb planted in the Academy's supply section. The explosion killed 4 students and 2 instructors. Day-One arrived at the scene to find High Rim coordinating emergency response, her face set in hard lines. "The Purists claimed responsibility," she said without preamble. "They say they will continue attacking until the Academy closes." Day-One looked at the wreckage, at the bodies being carried away, at the students huddled together in shock. He felt old suddenly, older than his years. If we close, they win. They prove that fear is stronger than knowledge. If we stay open, more people might die. People are already dying, in territorial disputes and resource wars, in the same old conflicts that have plagued the galaxy for millennia. He turned to face her. The labyrinth is changing that slowly. Every person who survives it, who learns to navigate impossible spaces, comes back different, more patient, more willing to understand instead of judge. If we stop now, we lose that. The Academy did not close. Security was increased, protocols were strengthened, but the training continued. The Purists attempted 2 more attacks, both stopped before they caused casualties. Then Council security forces, working with intelligence from multiple species, dismantled the organization. It turned out that understanding and cooperation were useful for more than navigating ancient alien structures. A year after the Academy opened, Day-One stood in the training hall watching the 3rd cohort of students. 32 beings this time from 21 species. The program was growing, and in the original class, several graduates had returned to become instructors themselves, teaching the methods they had learned to the next generation. Hana found him there late in the evening after the students had gone to rest. She had become one of the Academy's primary instructors, specializing in 3-dimensional mapping techniques. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Starting all this?" Day-One considered the question. He thought about the students who had died. He thought about the political complications, the attacks, the endless meetings and debates. He thought about how his quiet life as a cartographer had become this strange existence as the Pathfinder, a legend he had never wanted to be. No, he said finally. The progenitors left a message for us. They achieved incredible things, but they died alone, isolated by their own superiority. We have a chance to be different. These students, the ones who succeed, they are building something new, not through conquest or dominance, but through shared struggle and mutual understanding. Some people say you are too idealistic, that you do not see the reality of galactic politics. Maybe, but someone has to believe things can be better. Someone has to be willing to teach instead of hoard, to share instead of guard. He smiled slightly. Besides, I am just a cartographer. I make maps. What people do with those maps is their choice. I just hope they use them to find connection instead of just treasure. Ambassador Hiram entered the training hall, looking for Day-Wan. She carried a datapad with the latest reports. The council has approved funding for 3 more academy stations. They want to expand the program. More students, more opportunities. The labyrinth has different entrance points, different sections. We are starting to understand that it is even larger than we thought. There may be knowledge in there that we have not even begun to access. Hiram sat down beside them. You changed everything, you know. Not just by surviving, but by teaching others how to survive. Day-Wan shook his head. I just showed them a map. They are the ones walking the paths. Far below, in the council chamber converted to training space, a new student stood at the portal for the first time. They were from a species that had only recently achieved spaceflight, a civilization that the older powers had dismissed as primitive and unimportant, but they had been accepted into the Pathfinder program because they showed the qualities that mattered: patience, curiosity, and willingness to learn. The student was terrified. The portal swirled with impossible colors, leading to a place that had killed thousands. But they had trained for months, learned the methods, studied the maps. They understood that fear was normal, that doubt was natural, that even the Pathfinder had been afraid. Day-Wan watched from above as the student stepped through the portal. He did not know if they would succeed. Statistics said most would eventually, as training improved and understanding deepened. But each journey was unique. Each explorer faced their own challenges. What mattered was that they were trying. They were learning. They were proving that the impossible could be understood, that death traps could become classrooms, that fear could be transformed into knowledge. The portal remained open. The labyrinth waited, patient and eternal, no longer a grave but a school. And the maps grew more detailed with each passing day, drawn by hundreds of hands from dozens of species, all following the simple truth that one stubborn cartographer had proven with his life. Some places were not meant to be conquered. They were meant to be understood. And understanding, once earned and freely shared, could change everything. The galaxy was still dangerous. Wars still happened. Conflicts still erupted. But slowly, incrementally, things were different. Species that had never spoken now trained together. Rivals learned to trust each other's measurements. Warriors discovered patience and scholars found courage. And in the impossible corridors of the labyrinth, the future was being mapped one careful step at a time. Day-Wan returned to his quarters late that night. On his desk sat his original tablet, the one he had carried into the labyrinth a year ago. The data was long since backed up and distributed, but he kept the device itself as a reminder. A reminder that survival came not from being the strongest, but from being willing to understand, not from fighting what seemed impossible, but from mapping it carefully, patiently, until the impossible revealed its secrets. He slept well that night, as he did most nights now. The nightmares from the labyrinth had faded, replaced by dreams of corridors yet to be mapped, knowledge yet to be discovered, understanding yet to be earned. Somewhere in the depths of the ancient structure, in folded spaces where physics broke and reformed, the progenitor's library waited for the next student brave enough to learn its lessons. And thanks to one human cartographer who refused to give up, who chose to map instead of fight, to teach instead of hoard, those students would have a chance, not a guarantee. Never that. The labyrinth did not give guarantees, but a chance, a map, a path forward, and sometimes that was enough.